I used to have crazy bad sciatica and it plagued me for years until I finally found what was at the root cause of my problem. Today, I want to share with you the exact steps I took and how you can identify exactly what's going on with your issues. There are two main things to consider with sciatica that are major players and common reasons why people experience symptoms. The first thing is that the sciatic nerve runs through the low back, down the lumbar spine, out through the buttock and down the leg. Now, this is important because the sciatic nerve can get pinched in two of these locations, which can lead to significant symptoms. The first is that it can be pinched in the low back. What this means is that if you have a spine that is stuck in an extended position, this means that the arch of the low back is more than it normally should be. Now, a lot of people have a big low back arch, but for some people, it gets to the point where they have so much where the sciatic nerve root gets compressed. The other way is if you have compression of muscles on the backside of your pelvis. Most commonly, we identify the piriformis muscle as the muscle that can get tight and compress the sciatic nerve. But you could have both. You could have a pinch up here and a pinch in here too. Now, the reason why this happens is because as the pelvis is moving forward into extension, this is pushing our weight and our center of gravity forward onto our forefoot. Now, the body is trying to find stability and balance. It doesn't want to feel like it's falling in one direction or the other. So typically what we're going to see is the body just unconsciously feel like it's falling too far forward. So it will compress muscles on the backside of the pelvis, such as the piriformis, and that will help squeeze the backside of it to prevent us from falling too far forward. This is simply just a strategy to help manage our center of gravity. Now, this can be more present on one side of the body or the other. If you have a pelvis that is more forward on one side, then you might grip the backside of that pelvis a little bit more than the other side, and that can lead to more or single-sided symptoms on that given side. So to summarize, we can have a low back that's pushed forward into extension and or gripping of muscles on the backside of the pelvis like the piriformis. So because our center of gravity within our pelvis is being pushed forward, the fix is to restore a more neutral pelvis position, allow us to access that more easily, and also open up the backside of the pelvis. When we open up the backside of the pelvis, this is called hip internal rotation, and that is paired with nutation of the sacrum. When the sacrum bone right here, this is what I'm talking about, when it tips forward, that opens up muscles of the back bottom side of the pelvis. So when I had my sciatica, I had it predominantly on my left side. I had it on both sides a little bit, but I was really feeling it down that left leg. And that's because the left side of my pelvis was more forward than the right. So I had a lot of tightness and a lot of low back arch on my left side. So what I wanted to do was bring back the pelvis on the left side and help me better push my pelvis from right to left. Typically when someone has sciatica, they will have a very limited and also painful straight leg raise test. Now, the straight leg raise test traditionally is thought of as a hamstring flexibility test. This isn't entirely true. Now, it is partially true, but not in the way that most people think. Most people think if you have tight hamstrings, short hamstrings, you will have a limited straight leg raise. But we have to consider that the overwhelming majority of the population has some degree of anterior pelvic tilt, which means that that hamstring muscle is being pulled on as that pelvis tilts forward. And now if you go to stretch out that hamstring more with something like a straight leg raise, which will require more length of the hamstring, you can't stretch it out anymore. So you're going to be limited in your straight leg raise. That is one way that this can happen. So if you were to lay on your back and have a limited straight leg raise, in many cases to me, that means that you actually have a more forward pelvis. Also, a straight leg raise requires you beyond about 45 degrees to open up the backside of the pelvis and move your femur into what we call internal rotation. This bone needs to rotate in like that. The thing at the pelvis that helps facilitate that bone rotating in is the backside of the pelvis opening up and that sacrum moving into what we call nutation. You will not get much further beyond 45 degrees if you cannot internally rotate your femur and open up the backside of your pelvis to a certain extent. People with sciatica will oftentimes complain of symptoms when they do a straight leg raise and they get around the 45-degree range. I know that this was me, that's for sure. So instead of just stretching out the backside of our pelvis all day long, a better approach might be to re-educate the body how to control the tilt of the pelvis and create a more even center of gravity on the foot rather than being dumped forward onto the forefoot. A way we can do this is to actually facilitate recruitment of the hamstrings and pull the pelvis back on that side. And we can also potentially add a little bit of a ball squeeze that will help open up the backside of the pelvis. What we're gonna do is get our feet on the wall. And ideally for most people, they're gonna have a shelf underneath them of some sort. So you could use something like this DC block, you could use a bench, you could use whatever you need to stack up as long as you can still maintain your whole foot flat on the wall. That's gonna be the important part there because we need foot contacts on the wall. Those foot contacts are the inner heel and the first metatarsal head on both sides evenly. That doesn't mean we lose the outside foot, that just means that's where our bias is. Now, we're also gonna have an object in between our knees. And this object needs to be a little bit compressible, so that way when we squeeze it, our knees very slightly move in. But we also don't want the object to be so large that in the starting position, our knees are outside of our hips, so they're wide like that. It should be, we're starting pretty in line with our feet and our hips. And now what we're gonna do, keeping our hands on our low ribs and our chin directly at the ceiling, we're going to do a little posterior pelvic tilt. And we're gonna do that by dragging our feet down into that shelf or down on that wall, but they're not obviously going to move. It's the intention of dragging our heels down, which is going to lift our tailbone off of the floor. And as we do that, we're going to feel our hamstrings engage on both sides relatively evenly. Our low back remains flat. So that's all we're feeling right now is hamstrings. After you have that, you're going to squeeze the ball. And for this, you're gonna squeeze it a decent bit. On a scale of 1 to 10, you're looking at about somewhere between a 5 to 7 out of 10. Not to the point where you're shaking or you're sweating, just enough to kind of feel your inner thigh muscles working on both sides. So make sure you don't lose your hamstrings when you get that squeeze. And then you're just going to inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, softly sigh all the air out. You're going to be very tempted to tense other things up in your body as you do this, such as your neck, such as your calves, such as your abs, but you want to make sure that nothing is engaging other than your hamstrings and your inner thigh muscles. The only exception to that could be a little bit of your side abs at the end of the exhale. But as long as you're isolating those muscles, you're doing a really good job. The most common mistake on this is people are going to lift their hips too high in the air, and that is not what we want. We want the tailbone to be slightly lifted off of the floor, but not the low back. So it's important that you just do a little bit of a tilt and then engage with the squeeze. Depending on you as an individual, you may want to add a little support underneath your neck, like a towel rolled up. Just make sure that it's only as thick to the point where you feel like your neck is supported and your chin is passively pointing straight up at the ceiling. You don't ever want to do this where it's so thick and it's tilted back or it's collapsing down. That ball squeeze will help facilitate opening of the backside of the pelvis because that will drive internal rotation. Now, if you're having more issues on one side than the other, it may help you to do a posterior hip capsule stretch to open up this space. Now, when we do this exercise, please be careful not to move into too much hip bend or what we would call hip flexion. If you move too far into this, you are not going to feel it in the back of your hip, you're gonna feel it in the front of your hip, or something just might not feel right. Please ease your way into this. Only be in this position that you see right here for just a maybe 3 to 4 out of 10 intensity. You don't want to push it much more than that. You can progressively get into it more, but please don't go beyond what you see right here initially. All you have to do is just be in this position and slowly breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, trying to melt all the tension out of your body and just chill here for 60 to 120 seconds. What we're gonna do to start in the position is get our hands underneath our shoulders and knees underneath our hips in this quadruped position. And then you might wanna widen your knees out a little bit wider depending on what's comfortable for you, but play around with it and see what works best for you that gets you the best stretch in the hip here. Now, we're trying to get a stretch entirely in the back of the hip here. So we're gonna use the left side as the example of the hip we're gonna stretch. We're gonna start by bringing this left foot closer to the right, and the amount will vary depending on what's comfortable for you. And then we're gonna hook the right knee behind the left knee. And if it's comfortable for you, rest that right knee on the ground, but make sure all of your weight is in that left side right there. And then Trevor is going to drop down onto his elbows, and he is going to feel a stretch in the back left pocket of his hip. And if it helps, he can get his elbows a little bit further away from him, and that can make it a little bit less intense of a stretch if you find that this is too intense. And all Trevor's gonna do is sit here and breathe in through his nose, out through his mouth, just trying to melt, literally just relax all tension in his body except for the stretch sensation that he feels in his back left hip. From a top-down view, what it looks like is you have a little bit of side bend on the left side, so the left ribs are a little bit more in and closer to the hip, and your head should be nice and neutral. So you don't want it side bent to the left too much. You want it just nice and relaxed, looking straight down at the floor. If you like this type of approach that addresses the true root cause of a lot of these issues like sciatica, check out my beginner body restoration program. It's designed for anyone to be able to do, requires minimal to no special equipment whatsoever. It starts you off with easy exercises and slowly progresses you to the point where you're doing more integrative things that are more reflective of how humans actually move. And you can even individualize it to your own asymmetry. So check it out down below in the description if you want to learn more. Now, the last thing that might be helpful is to facilitate more single-sided opening of the backside of the pelvis through muscles that create internal rotation of that side. I'm a big fan of this exercise where we're intentionally laying on our side and pulling back the pelvis on that side and pushing down on that top side to help open up that backside pelvis and improve internal rotation. We're gonna do that in the presence of a neutral pelvis, not one that is extended forward like that. We're gonna have a side-lying 90-90 position, meaning we have a 90-degree bend at both our knees and our hips. And we have the top arm just long on the ground, so that way we can just support our head almost as if we're taking a nap, and our head can be very slightly side bent to the downside. We have a ball in between our knees and our thighs. Something that's slightly compressible is ideal. If you don't have a ball like this, you could use a pillow folded up in half. You could use a towel folded up, something a little bit with some give to it. And we have our feet in line with our knees, which are in line with our hips here. So the first thing we're gonna do here is feel even foot pressure on both feet. Both feet are flat on the wall there. We're not pushing into the wall, we're just feeling them be flat on the wall. But we're gonna focus particularly on this top side right here. We're just gonna make sure we don't lose pressure on the downside. This is where the action's coming from. The foot pressures we wanna feel on the top leg right here, the top foot, are the inner heel and first metatarsal head. It doesn't mean we lose the outside foot, that's just where the bias is within that foot. So to initiate this after we get the foot pressures, we're going to exhale through our mouth fully and for a long time, like a sigh, rather than and we're gonna feel our side abs, particularly on the top side, engage at the end of that exhale. Now, our ribs are gonna be in a position where they're kind of down and tucked in. We're gonna maintain that as we inhale through the nose, and then slightly shift this top knee behind the bottom knee. Just a little bit, couple of centimeters is all we're looking for there. And then we're gonna exhale through our mouth just like the first exhale, side out and push down into the ball very gently, about a 2 or 3 out of 10. And we're gonna feel our inner thigh muscle, our adductor engage on this top leg. We're also gonna feel a little bit more side abs on this top side. If you don't feel more side abs, we'll get to that in a second. But we should at least feel the inner thigh on this top leg. Bottom side leg is just hanging out. Inhale, pull back a little bit further with this top leg. If you can't go any further back, that's okay. Just have the intention to consciously, and that'll still help you further recruit that inner thigh adductor muscle. All the while, Trevor is making sure he's not letting his rib cage flare or overly tuck more. He's just maintaining this position. His head and neck are relaxed. And he's gonna go through sets of about 5 breaths of this, progressively feeling a little bit more adductor. You might also feel a little bit of your glute med engaging on this top side, and that's okay. Just make sure it's not the side of your hip, your TFL muscle. We don't want that engaged. So if you do feel that, we'll talk about that in a second. Something we may have you do to get more side abs on this top side if you're struggling is to take that top arm, the left arm in this instance, and just simply reach it for the wall like that. That should help you close off this space more and get more obliques upon that exhalation. Just make sure you're getting a full exhalation. The other thing is if you're feeling the side of your hip engage, like your TFL, and it's not your glute med, then you are probably in too much hip flexion. You need to back away from the wall just a little bit. Just make sure you don't go too far. So about there is where I would put Trevor if he was feeling that. But if you go too far, you're not gonna get anything out of this exercise. That's not gonna do anything. So you wanna be somewhere around a 60-degree bend at your hips, and that's about as far back as I would get you. I'd recommend doing each of these things for about 2 sets of 5 to 10 very slow and controlled breath cycles. Now guys, people are gonna screw this up by trying too hard. They're gonna try and force themselves into this position. If there's anything that I learned from my own journey and coaching hundreds of people that deal with similar issues, it's that they're going to put too much effort into these exercises. They're gonna strain themselves and they're going to set themselves off because they're going to be trying to force a giant stretch or some big thing to happen at their pelvis, and they're going to end up just aggravating things because they're moving into too much, too fast, too soon. Please remember what I said about 3 to 4 out of 10 intensity. That applies to all of these exercises. I cannot tell you how many times I have gotten so much better results with people when they actually go slower and more controlled with less effort. Just find and feel the right things as I described in the exercise, nothing more than that. And if you can do that and you can breathe through it, you'll teach your body that these are safe and comfortable positions to be in, and you can create adaptation so much better that way. So I hope that helps, and I'll see you guys in the next video.